No one at the wildlife rescue had ever heard anything like it. The bear cub, tiny, wide-eyed, and barely a few weeks old, had just been pulled from a roadside ditch when he began making strange sounds. Not growls. Not whimpers. But something closer to speech? At first, the staff thought it was a fluke. But every time someone entered his enclosure, he talked, soft grunts, syllable-like murmurs, even what sounded like names. The more he healed, the more vocal he became. It was as if he wanted to be understood. Then came the moment he spoke, while pointing his nose toward the forest. What happened next left rescuers stunned, and led them to uncover something hidden deep in the woods. This isn't just a story about a talking bear cub. It's about memory, emotion, and a message no one expected, from a creature most had already given up on. It was the kind of morning that clung to your skin, wet fog hanging low over the tree-lined road that curved through the edge of the national forest. Officer Paul Hensley had driven this stretch for years, always on the lookout for fallen branches, stranded hikers, or the occasional deer crossing too slowly. But what he saw that morning made him slam on the brakes. At first, it looked like a clump of fur, something dark and still at the edge of the gravel shoulder. Roadkill, maybe. But then it moved. Paul got out cautiously. Kneeling down, he saw the shape more clearly now, a bear cub, no larger than a medium-sized dog, trembling from cold and exhaustion. Its front paw was scraped and bleeding, and its tiny ribs were showing beneath its damp fur. But it was the sound that stopped Paul mid-reach. It was making noises. Not growling. Not the high-pitched crying of an orphaned animal. No, this sounded like a string of low garbled grunts, spaced evenly, like syllables. The cub looked directly at him and made the sound again. "Easy there, little guy," Paul whispered, blinking. "What are you trying to say?" He pulled out his phone and called the local wildlife rescue center. As he waited for them to arrive, he laid down his coat beside the cub and watched him, trying not to flinch every time the creature made those strange rhythmic sounds. An hour later, the rescue team arrived. Male cub, maybe 10 weeks old, one of the vets, Dr. Marla Chun, said. Dehydrated. Malnourished. But alive. She paused. And vocal. Paul nodded. You heard that too? The cub had let out another burst of that same strange chatter the moment the team tried to lift him. He wasn't lashing out. He wasn't scared. It was like he was trying to talk to them. Back at the wildlife center, the cub was placed in quarantine for initial observation. They named him Coda, after the old native word for friend, a name chosen half in jest, half in awe of how quickly he seemed to want human attention. But by the end of that first day, every staff member had noticed the same thing. Coda didn't act like most rescued cubs. He didn't hide. He didn't growl when people approached. And most of all, he didn't stop making those sounds. Lila, a 23-year-old volunteer with a soft spot for orphan cubs, lingered at his enclosure after hours. She scribbled in her notebook while Coda paced, then settled in a ball of fur near the glass. As the lights dimmed, he let out one final string of low murmurs, like a lullaby without melody. She put down her pen and whispered, "What are you trying to tell us?" Outside, the forest wind howled, and something in Coda's eyes glimmered, not fear, not confusion. It looked like longing. By the third day, whispers were spreading through the wildlife rescue center. He's doing it again, one of the interns muttered. In the viewing room, Lila stood with her arms crossed, watching Coda through the reinforced glass. He was curled on a pile of soft straw, a warm heat lamp above his head. A dish of fresh water sat untouched beside him, but he wasn't asleep. He was talking. Low, gravelly murmurs rolled from his throat like clockwork. Not constant, but in bursts. He'd pause, tilt his head like he was listening, then continue. Every sequence had the same strange rhythm. One syllable. Then two. Then one again. Lila had been tracking it for hours. He's repeating that same sound structure again, she said, flipping her notebook open. Almost like, it means something. Dr. Chun raised a skeptical brow. He's just vocalizing. Some cubs do that when they're anxious. But not like this, Lila pressed. Not with patterns. Dr. Chun sighed, but her curiosity had already been piqued. All right. Let's monitor him closer. Record everything. If nothing else, it'll help us understand his behavior. That night, Coda's soft murmurs echoed on the security footage. At 2:17 a.m., he lifted his head, stared directly at the camera, and made a sequence of grunts, one long, one short, two quick ones, before curling back to sleep. The next day, Dr. Chun called in a wildlife behaviorist from the university. Professor Neil Graves, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s, arrived with 2 audio recorders and a mountain of skepticism. "You think this cub is speaking?" he asked Lila. "Not in words," she replied carefully. "But communicating. Definitely." Graves listened to the recordings, then spent 2 hours observing Coda in silence. The cub made the same repeated sounds whenever Lila stood near the glass. Finally, Graves scribbled on his notepad and leaned back. "It's mimicry," he said, "but advanced. He's not just making noise. He's trying to match the tone and rhythm of human speech." Dr. Chun looked stunned. "But how?" "He was found alone. Barely alive." "Exactly. Which means he must have been exposed to human voices before he was found. Maybe for days. Maybe longer." Lila's eyes widened. "You think someone raised him?" "Or tried to," Graves replied. "But something went wrong." The idea left the room silent. That afternoon, the staff began referring to Coda as the talking bear half-jokingly, but always with a hint of wonder. The sound tech set up proper microphones inside the enclosure. Lila was given the lead role in documenting his vocalizations. Her journal quickly filled with timestamps, phonetic breakdowns, and patterns. But the real breakthrough came 2 days later. Coda was lying close to the glass while Lila spoke softly to him, reading aloud from a children's book. The moment she said the word forest, he stood up suddenly and grunted twice, once sharply then softly. She repeated the word. He did it again. Lila's hand shook as she wrote it down. He knows words. Or at least he remembers how they sound. Suddenly, Coda pressed his tiny paw to the glass and made the same sound, forest, again. It wasn't just mimicry anymore. It was memory. And somewhere behind those amber eyes, a story was waiting to be told. Professor Graves couldn't sleep that night. There was something about Coda's gaze, something deeply unsettling and familiar. Early the next morning, he requested access to all nearby wildlife surveillance footage from the weeks before the cub was found. He combed through hours of grainy recordings, hikers passing through, forest animals wandering in and out of frame, quiet trees whispering nothing. Until one file caught his attention. A motion-triggered camera set along a remote trail had picked up an unusual scene. Timestamp: 10 days before Coda's rescue. A woman was standing at the edge of a clearing. Early 30s. Short hair. Camouflage jacket. She looked tired. Next to her was the cub. Coda was smaller then, limping slightly, but unmistakably him. What made the footage chilling wasn't that he was near a human. It was what he did. He looked up at her, stood on his hind legs, and made the same set of vocalizations now recorded in the shelter. The woman had crouched down and spoken back. But the audio had no sound. Graves leaned in, staring at the woman's lips, replaying the moment over and over. He called Dr. Chen immediately. "You're going to want to see this." By noon, the entire team gathered in the briefing room. "Where was this recorded?" Paul asked, his brow furrowed. "About 30 miles northeast of the rescue site," Graves said. "This camera belongs to a conservationist group monitoring illegal trapping." "So?" She raised him. "Looks that way," Graves replied. "But not officially. No reports filed. No rescue license. Nothing. We don't know who she is. But the real issue is, she didn't just feed him. She talked to him. And he learned." Lila sat in stunned silence, her heart racing. He wasn't trying to mimic us. He was looking for her. The realization hit the room like thunder. Everything he'd been doing, the murmurs, the pawing at the glass, the way he lit up when someone spoke gently, it wasn't just communication. It was longing. That afternoon, Lila returned to Coda's enclosure. She didn't bring her notebook. Just her voice. "Hey buddy," she said softly. Coda perked up instantly. "I saw the video. She taught you, didn't she?" Her voice trembled. "Where is she now?" Coda let out a deep grunt. Then, slowly, he repeated the same pattern from the forest camera footage. Once. Twice. Then a different sound. Sharper. Urgent. Lila blinked. That's new. She pressed the intercom. Dr. Chun, I think he's trying to tell us something. Later that evening, Paul did something unexpected. He got in his truck, printed a still from the surveillance footage, and drove to the ranger outpost near the northern forest gate. He showed the photo to a ranger named Sylvia, who stared at it for a long moment. Yeah. I know her, she said. Name's Harper Wren. Used to be a wildlife rehabber. Real passionate type. Burned out after her permit got revoked. Revoked? Paul asked. Too many violations, Sylvia said. They said she got too close to the animals. Treated them like people. Especially this one bear cub she found last winter. Paul's eyes widened. Why? She said he talked to her, Sylvia added, with a sad laugh. Everyone thought she was losing it. By nightfall, Harper Wren's name was at the top of the center's whiteboard. And for the first time since his rescue, Coda slept silently. Like he knew the search for his lost voice had finally begun. 2 days later, Harper Wren stood just beyond the glass of the observation enclosure, tears in her eyes and wind in her hair. She looked thinner than in the footage, worn older, but the moment Coda saw her, everything in the room changed. The cub, who had spent days vocalizing restlessly, went still. Then he stood up on his hind legs and made the sound. That familiar, broken, hopeful sound. Harper pressed a hand to the glass. Her voice cracked. I'm here, baby. Coda let out a soft, trembling growl. Then a chuff. Then the low, drawn-out mumble, the one only she seemed to understand. The center fell into silence. Lila, standing nearby, had tears in her eyes too. Dr. Chun leaned toward Professor Graves and whispered, That's not mimicry. No, Graves replied. That's memory. Harper Wren sat in the small interview room while Coda rested in the next enclosure, finally calm. I didn't steal him, she said. He was alone. I found him tangled in wire near my cabin. He couldn't walk, couldn't even eat properly. And no one would come help. So I did what I had to. Paul nodded slowly. And the vocalizations? Harper gave a sheepish smile. Well, I didn't have any other bears around to teach him. So I just talked to him. Like a baby. Over and over. I guess he listened. She looked toward the window where Coda now snored softly. I didn't think he'd remember. Dr. Chun crossed her arms. You didn't report him. That put you both at risk. I know, Harper said quietly. But I didn't just see an animal. I saw a soul. He was asking for connection. And I needed it too. She wasn't wrong. A search of Harper's records showed a history of trauma, loss of a spouse, estrangement from family, years spent in solitude. Coda had arrived in her life when everything else had fallen apart. And she had saved him. Loved him. Taught him to speak in her language. Lila stood up. We can't punish her for caring. She broke protocol, Paul said flatly. But maybe this is something we're not trained to handle. Graves agreed. There's a precedent for primates mimicking human speech. But not wild bears. This, he motioned toward Coda, this is evolutionary adaptation, or something deeper. Emotional intelligence, Dr. Chun whispered. Maybe even grief. That night, Lila stayed behind again. She sat cross-legged on the floor outside Coda's enclosure, Harper beside her. Do you think he'll forget? Lila asked. Harper smiled faintly. Not him. Bears don't forget who saved them. He just doesn't know why I left. Coda stirred and opened one eye. When he saw them, he let out a small quiet sound. Not frantic. Not confused. Just comforted. The center's board of directors called an emergency meeting the next day. Wildlife had rules. Protocols. Boundaries. But what happened with Coda didn't fit in any box. So, instead of punishment, they chose something radical. Let's let them reunite, Dr. Chun proposed. Temporarily. Under observation. Let's listen. Everyone agreed. This wasn't a scientific anomaly. It was a conversation waiting to be heard. The observation room was dead quiet. Coda sat calmly on his padded platform, staring through the glass at a room full of scientists, rangers, and media personnel, all holding their breath. In the center sat Harper Wren, smiling nervously, a microphone clipped to her shirt. "Say hi to them," she whispered. Coda tilted his head and gave a long, low series of grunts, broken into spaced syllables. The room erupted. Dr. Chun watched the live brain scans in the back room as Coda repeated the sounds again, this time matching hand signals Harper used. "He's not just mimicking," she whispered. "He's anticipating." For 2 weeks, Coda was allowed limited, controlled sessions with Harper. During that time, the staff documented more than 30 distinct vocal sequences, each tied to actions, emotions, or specific objects. When Harper said the word apple, Coda responded with a double snort and click. When she said hug, he would grunt twice and press his body against the glass. But it wasn't just about repetition. One day, when Harper tripped while walking into the room, Coda let out a completely new sequence, short staccato grunts, followed by a howl. Graves, watching from the hallway, muttered, he worried. "He's not just learning. He's feeling." Outside the center, the world was watching. Videos of Coda's talking were going viral. Millions of views. Headlines screamed, "The chatty cub. The bear who missed his mom. Can a bear learn a human language?" But not everyone believed it. Some called it a hoax. Others accused Harper of training him like a circus act. So the center took a risk. They allowed a live broadcast. The world watched. Harper entered the room. Coda looked up. She waved and said, "Do you remember?" The cub softly grunted 3 times. Then one long groan. Harper smiled. "That's our word for safe, isn't it?" Gasps echoed from behind the cameras. She continued, "What do you want right now?" Coda lifted his paw, scratched the floor once, then groaned low. Harper turned to the camera. "That means, with me. He wants to be with me." It wasn't perfect. He wasn't speaking English. But this was more than imitation. It was association, emotion, attachment, a bond that had grown even in absence. At the board meeting that night, Paul stood first. "I've seen angry bears, hungry bears, scared ones, but I've never seen one ask for someone." Lila followed. Harper saved him. But more than that, he saved her. They've healed each other. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "So what are we saying? He can't go back to the wild?" Graves nodded. "No. And I don't think he wants to." The decision came 2 days later. Coda would not be released. Instead, the center would build a specialized outdoor habitat for him, spacious, enriched, and shared with Harper for educational work and emotional bonding studies. Lila would become his full-time handler. But before the paperwork was filed, Coda did something that made everyone sure it was the right choice. He began talking in his sleep. Tiny, muffled sounds. Repeating the same 3-note pattern over and over. Lila sat beside the glass and whispered, "What do you think he's dreaming about?" Harper answered without hesitation, "Home." The wind rustled through the tall pines surrounding the new enclosure, far from cages, concrete, or metal doors. This was Coda's place now, 3 acres of mixed forest and meadow, dotted with logs, boulders, and shallow creeks. But it wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a classroom. A stage. A place where stories would be told, not by books or teachers, but by a bear who talked. On opening day, dozens of families lined up behind the observation windows. Children clutched plush bear toys. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Scientists watched silently, notebooks in hand. And then, Harper stepped out. She wore a simple green vest and walked to the enclosure edge, calling softly, "Coda." A rustle. Then he appeared. No longer the frail cub found in a ditch, Coda had grown into a powerful adolescent, sleek brown fur, strong limbs, and steady eyes. But when he saw Harper, he did something that no one watching would ever forget. He let out 3 soft grunts, then paused, and whimpered low. The same sequence he had used months ago in the observation room. The same one that meant, "I'm safe. I'm home." Gasps. Applause. And a few quiet tears. A month passed. Coda now lived a life unlike any other bear. He wasn't performing tricks. He wasn't caged. He was simply being, surrounded by people who listened. He became the subject of books, documentaries, and even a children's show called Coda's Forest Friends. Harper read him letters from kids around the world. Some wrote in drawings. Some sent little audio clips trying to talk Coda's language. One boy from Ukraine wrote, "I don't speak English well, but I speak bear now. Gurguro means hug. Right." Harper smiled and cried at the same time. But change was coming again. Harper stood by the enclosure fence, one hand on the warm wood, watching Coda nuzzle a new handler. Lila had stepped fully into the role, strong, confident, and deeply bonded with the bear. Dr. Chun approached gently. "You've done something incredible here, Harper." Harper turned. "He saved me as much as I saved him." "You leaving?" She nodded. "It's time. I was always meant to help him find his voice, not be the only one who heard it." A pause. "But I'll come visit. Always." On her last day, the staff gathered around a picnic table beneath the trees. Someone had baked a goodbye cake. Someone else made a collage of Coda's photos. But it was Coda who gave the final gift. As Harper stood to leave, he walked to the edge of the enclosure, looked her in the eye, and grunted once, paused, then let out a new sound. A gentle, rising whine, like a farewell note held in a bear's throat. Harper froze. "That's new," whispered Dr. Chun. She stepped closer, tears welling up. "Is that your goodbye, Coda?" He grunted once more. Then turned, walked back into the trees, and disappeared into the golden light. In the months that followed, Coda's Voice Project expanded globally, training wildlife rescuers to pay closer attention to animal communication. New tools, new approaches, and a deeper understanding that animals may feel more, and say more, than we've ever known. And Harper? She wrote a book. Titled simply, "The Bear Who Spoke First." The dedication read, "To anyone who's ever been unheard, unseen, or misunderstood. Your voice matters. Just ask the bear who never stopped trying."